So reading from 2 Kings chapter 2, I'm going to be reading to verse 18. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elijah, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elijah said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elijah and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elijah replied, "but do not speak of it." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elijah. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elijah and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "but do not speak of it." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men of the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I am taken from you." "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elijah replied. "You've asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours, otherwise not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elijah saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them apart. He picked up the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak that had fallen from him and struck the water with it. "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. The company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, "The spirit of Elijah is resting on Elijah." They went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. "Look," they said, "we, your servants, have 50 able men. Let them go and look for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has picked him up and set him down on some mountain or in some valley." "No," Elijah replied, "do not send them." But they persisted until he was too ashamed to refuse. So he said, "Send them." And they sent 50 men who searched for 3 days but did not find him. When they returned to Elijah, who was staying in Jericho, he said to them, "Didn't I tell you not to go?" So today we read of Elijah's death. He's taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah knows it's coming, as also the prophets Elijah and Elijah meet the coming company of prophets along the way. They know what's about to happen. And it seems he's set up this school of prophets in various towns, and he seems to be visiting them for the last time. But along the journey, Elijah seems to be trying to get Elisha and to not accompany him. And Elijah keeps refusing. Perhaps Elijah wants to test Elisha's commitment. Or perhaps Elijah wants to be sure or wants to be a one-man band, to live, to work, to die on his own. Elijah was a great servant of God. Yet the mantle here passes from one to another. But even though Elijah has gone, the work continues, the mission continues. And that's an important lesson for us. God's work and ministry is not dependent on us. As much as we perhaps would like to think it is, it isn't. God's work will continue without us. But it also tells us something about training. You'll remember back in 1 Kings, Elijah thought he was on his own. Then he was sent Elijah to work with him. And then he sets up this company of prophet. He trains, raises up successors who will carry on the work. And that's part of our job, to be looking for and to train up the next generation, to make sure God's work, the good news of Jesus, continues. And as for Elijah, he wants to carry on the work. Verse 10, he points out both the challenge and the privilege. There's going to be the challenge, it's going to demand, and sacrifices are going to be involved. But working for the Lord is also a great privilege. It's a God-given task. And then we see verses 17 and 18 that Elijah is confirmed as a true prophet. That's the bit about parting of the waters in verses 13 and 14. And he says he's inherited a double portion of Elijah's spirit. The waters had parted for both Moses and Elijah. And this is showing Elisha as their successor. But you notice, Elijah is busy. Right until he dies. He's continuing to teach faithfully till the end. He's continuing to train the next generation. How often do we stop serving the Lord before the job's fully done? Elijah dies. Elijah was faithful in this life. But this life is not all that there is. We read Elijah is swept up to heaven forever. This world is not our home. We're exiles. We're just passing through. And strange as it may seem, though, this is not the end of Elijah's story. Read the very last verses of the Old Testament, Malachi chapter 4. It says this, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. Or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction." Now Jesus explains what this means. Matthew chapter 17 verses 10 to 13. The disciples asked him, "Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. In other words, John the Baptist was not Elijah, but he came in the power of Elijah. So Elijah continues and Jesus recognizes him. But there's more. Luke chapter 9, the famous story of the Transfiguration. What happens? Elijah is there. He's with Jesus on the mountainside. He gets to meet Jesus. He affirms that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah. What a privilege for Elijah. What a privilege for us. We can know that there is life beyond the grave. Death comes to Elijah. Death comes to us all. Perhaps not in the dramatic way it comes to Elijah. But like Elijah, it will come suddenly and swiftly. Are we ready? Likewise, Jesus says he will return. And that will be swift and sudden. The time of preparation now will be over. Are we ready for Jesus' return? And of course it affirms that there is life beyond the grave. That great hope of heaven is proved in the life and witness of Elijah. Then of course there's this thing about successors. Those of us who are leaders, are we raising up and training the next generation? Because it's not about us. It's about the message, not the messenger.